Well, if we look back at our experience, or my experience of backcountry skiing, we learned this in avalanche trading. It's something that you talk with your partners when you go out in the backcountry. What is the protocol? And we can use that same protocol when it comes to financial challenges. And the first is to get your bearings. So you orient yourself with the situation. So when you get your bearings, what does that look like? You've got to, figure out your runway. So that's kind of the first thing. So if financially you can, kind of stop, you can scan, you can breathe, you can look around, you can say, okay, well, what does this look like? And when we think about it, we have to start looking at what's the first thing we should look at. And it's how long can you operate if nothing else improves? So if we're looking at a cash crisis, a liquidity situation, we want to see, okay, well, if in this scenario, how long could I survive on my cash savings or my income? We can start looking at this from just a planning standpoint. And this is oftentimes, these are some of the things that we look at with our clients is how much emergency fund do you have? What does that runway look like? And then we look at obligations. So what is that? So this is the things that must be paid for to avoid permanent damage. I think of like mortgages, utilities, premiums for insurance, paying your taxes, kind of those minimum debt payments if you've got a credit card, or potentially legal obligations. And this can come through in all different ways. So, if for example, you run a business and things start to slow down, what is the most important thing that you've got to pay in order to make things work? And then we can start making decisions from there. The next is going to be exposure. So what is your exposure? So understanding kind of what's kind of the worst thing that could be going on. And I look at this as kind of the most important things that we should be focusing on. So again, what are those things that could make things worse faster? Insurance gaps, variable rate debt, for example, concentrated holdings. So if you own a single stock and the thing's all over the place, business guarantees. If you've got, maybe your business guarantee on your lease or something like that, or liabilities exposure. So understanding those variables that are going to exist inside of your personal financial situation. And again, this is where we start to marry up your business and your personal finances are very tied together. And so we have to understand that all of these are not just operating individually, they're kind of operating together. And then bearing number 4 is going to be the next right steps. So what are the next actions in the next 48 hours, the next 30 days, the next 90 days to make sure that you're going to be staying on track and that you're not going to make the situation worse? So again, creating your bearings, understanding the orientation of where you are financially. This is really similar to what happens if an avalanche comes down. You're going to sit there, you've got to wait till the snow settles, then you're going to try to identify who's there. Are you okay? Are you above the slide, below the slide? If there's other risks, the same thing goes when it comes to your financial situation. Understand the runway, understand obligations, understand the exposures that might be out there, the risks, and then what are those next steps? What's the first step that you need to do? Is it to right the ship? And this is where we start to then get into the next phase of it, which is going to be stabilize. So when we think about stabilizing, you've oriented yourself, you've kind of figured out all this stuff. You haven't really made any decisions at this point. You've just said, okay, these are kind of the most important things that we need to be considering. Now we go into stabilization. The stabilizing is, again, identifying those bare minimum monthly baseline expenses and then going there. Pausing the non-essential spending. So these are things that maybe the subscription. This is temporary. This isn't like forever. Maybe it's paying a credit card. I think this is really interesting, is like just paying the minimum. Maybe you paid off your credit card in full every month. You were great about that. And then all of a sudden something happens, paying that minimum credit card and just like letting it ride, because then, maybe after, 30, 60, 90 days, you go back to paying it all off. Maybe it's just a little gap there. Or prioritize those bills that are, could create permanent damage. I think of this as like a mortgage payment. You've got to put that at the top of the stack. And in some cases, you got to think about your capital stack. So, what are the liabilities? What are the things that are kind of at the top that are going to get paid first? And then we can kind of push those things down. What I hate to see is when people prioritize the wrong thing. They're like, what, I can't get rid of my Netflix, but gosh, I'm not gonna pay my mortgage. And so we got to make sure that we're prioritizing the right thing at the right time. And then negotiate where possible. I mean, there are certain circumstances where you can get delayed payments. You can, talk with a borrower. You can, adjust rates. You can start to navigate through these things. And this is all about that stabilizing the cash flow. And then we have to think about stabilizing your decisions. So it's not just about cash flow, it's also about decisions. So I would say avoid drastic portfolio overhauls in a panic. And this could be, losing a job, you liquidate everything, market drops, you liquidate everything. These are things that can be very real. So I would avoid major decisions during this period of time. This also reminds me of, if something happens in a household, if somebody passes away, there are some steps, some instances where I've seen people go into a little bit of a tailspin when it comes to decision making. This can be, buying things that are unnecessary. They're just not thinking about all the pieces that come together. And in the end, they have regret. And so I think from that standpoint, we've got obviously the cash flow side, but also the decision side. So don't raid retirement accounts without understanding the tax penalties, the alternatives. What are some other things that you could do? And then I think the biggest thing is communicating, whether that's to your advisor, whether that's to your spouse, just understanding, because sometimes if you're carrying a burden and maybe it's something that's not super dramatic, you don't have the cut on your face, so nobody knows what's going on, but you just need to release that energy. That can be a really, really cathartic situation where it just gets out the emotions. And once it's said, once it's out in the open, then you can kind of stop hiding from it, and you can start taking action. And I think if we think about it from that standpoint, the stabilization phase can really be awesome when you start getting into the taking actions, taking real action. And when I think about this, the big part is avoiding the permanent mistakes in that temporary moment. Because the old adage, if you're going through hell, keep on going. Well, that's just the idea of keep moving forward, keep taking the right steps. Because in the end, if you're doing the right steps, you're taking action in the right way, you can get through this. And that's where we start to getting into that, what I call the 90-day operating plan. And this 90-day operating plan, the orientation and the stabilization to now regaining control. So I think about this in three parts. The first is an income plan. So what are your replacement options? What is the business triage you could have? What's the timeline? What are the next actions? So when I think about this, for example, let's just say business starts going down, and it's not just a momentary thing. It's kind of a, you've got to close shop. Well, maybe it's possible to get another job. Maybe there's an adjacent business that's very similar to the one that you're closing down that, gosh, they're hiring. Maybe you were your own boss for a long time, but you got to swallow your pride a little bit and move on. And maybe getting a job is the absolute necessity in this moment. So what does that income plan look like? The next component would be your spending and debt plan. So what is that baseline budget? Again, we've got to do some austerity measures in certain circumstances. So austerity is cutting. Where do we do that? What's the most meaningful things to do? What are we cutting away? What are we restructuring? That is super important. So what, exactly targeting the few things that you need to cut out. What is the diet, so to speak, that you've got to be on? And then we've got the third part is going to be the tax and the admin. So, if you're going to be taking withdrawals, do you need to do withholding? Is there some healthcare decisions that you need to be making? Is there, account access? Are there beneficiaries? These are all things that can happen in certain circumstances. And it's always going to be unique to it. But I think if we can kind of go through the steps here in that 90-day action plan, we can then start to formulate. So at the end of that 3 months, you're going to be feeling in a lot better place. You might have a new job. You might have, gone through the most emotional part if you lost a spouse or a loved one. If you're going through a business challenge, for example, it might be, hey, that was just a bump in the road, and now we've got our sales right, and now we're in the right place. So it's really good to kind of understand what this looks like. And what I always put the emphasis on is this is not a novel. We don't need to get exactly the right details, and it can be done on one page. It's just understanding the framework for what that looks like and moving in the right direction. Then we move on to the most important step, and that's the rebuild. You've gotten beaten down. You may have taken a little bit of an ego hit. Emotionally, you might be spent. But now it's the rebuild. Now it's getting back up on your feet, pulling yourself up. Gosh, you might even need somebody else to help you up off the ground. But it's the idea that you can move forward and you can do it with confidence. And if you've understood your bearings, you've stabilized, you've created the plan, and then you execute, this is where the rebuild can really happen. So then we start to get back into those consistent patterns of what worked before. You can rebalance. It's not about not selling. It's not about not making moves. Like, you can sell as an example, but now maybe it's a rebalance of a portfolio. Maybe it's an income portfolio. So there's a lot of things that we can start to look at from an investment side that could help you. But you're not doing it emotionally. You're not just saying sell, sell, sell. It's getting back to, okay, well, what does this look like now? This is my new normal. This is how I need to recalibrate, rethink what I'm doing. And it's a good opportunity to just, evaluate and figure out what the path is forward. Then you maybe need to rebuild the reserves. So if you lost a job and you had, a 60-day period of time where, gosh, you had to use the emergency fund. Well, guess what? The reason that you had an emergency fund was for emergencies, for situations just like this. So we got to rebuild it. Maybe it's not focusing on the retirement savings. Maybe we focus on the rebuild. That's certainly something that is very important as well. And then we need to update those protections. So, something that we look at is, if there was a death in the family and they were a primary beneficiary, well, maybe now we need to adjust the beneficiary. We need to do a review. We need to understand what's going on, where have things changed. If you've changed jobs, if things have adjusted in your household, if you got divorced, maybe you have to get your own insurance. There's a whole host of things that you have to do. And again, that's just part of that rebuild. It's part of getting used to that new normal. And then, as I mentioned before, it's realigning those goals. It's realigning what that new life kind of looks like past that event. And I think about my experience when I started in this business was in August of 2009. And I always say that it was like walking on the battlefield after the last shot was fired. So I'm looking around and I'm talking with these people, and they've lost 30, 40, 50% of their retirement, and they're shell-shocked. They don't know what to think. They don't trust the system. And now we have to kind of think about, okay, well, how do we move forward? Because this stuff isn't going to go away, and retirement just doesn't cease to exist. We have to start talking about it through different lenses. And maybe it's thinking about risk. Maybe it's looking at things through, a little bit of a different view, because maybe, it's kind of having a little bit of an ego check, being humbled a bit. There's a whole host of emotions that can go along with it. And if we're not willing to evaluate, have a little bit of awareness, and do kind of that post-mortem, then you're going to be in a bad spot, because you're not going to learn from those mistakes, learn what happened during that, and you can't apply that to the rules going forward, and you can't take that as an opportunity to grow from it. So when I think about it in the context of this backcountry skiing, you go out, you be prepared, you understand what the plan is, you understand your role in the group, you do all the steps, you do the safety checks. In finance, it's really not much different. Obviously, it's not as life-threatening, but you create the plan, you understand how that thing works, you understand what the systems are that are going into it, you can pressure test it, and when something bad happens, or if something bad happens, you can fall back on, okay, this is why we did this. Then all of a sudden those whys really start to stack up. Why did we do this investment this way? Oh, well, that's because we were worried about this happening. Well, guess what? That might have happened. Why did you get life insurance? Because, gosh, we wanted to protect our income. And when we start to think about it through that lens, I think it's really, really helpful. And one thing that we're going to create is a checklist for you to be able to provide yourself and look at if you're going through that financial situation. If you haven't gone through it, consider yourself lucky. But there's so many people out there that have gone through the really challenging moments. And I've seen this through various downturns. COVID was a big one. We saw this in 2022 when we started to see interest rates spike. There's a whole host of times that I've seen this with my own eyes. And if you can have the checklist, if you can have the things in place that will help you guide yourself through this, then that's awesome. And if you need help, this is somebody, this is absolutely what we do here at 4 Points Wealth. We help you build the plan, because in the event that something bad happens, you can fall back on some of those foundational elements of having a strong plan in place. And you can fall back on a professional that can help you navigate these sort of circumstances, and maybe we can reflect back to you of what's the right step. If you're overreacting, if you're underreacting, if you're not reacting properly, there's all of these things that we can start to look at. And this is what we do at 4 Points Wealth. So what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to provide you with that checklist so you can download that within the blog, and we can also schedule some time. So that's where we start. We start every one of our relationships with a conversation. What are you looking for? Where are you today? And where are you trying to go? And if you're on that path and you're looking for some guidance, then absolutely we're here to help. So you might be in it right now. And I will tell you, if you're in one of those situations where the bottom's kind of falling out for you, it's not about being perfect. It's about taking the right steps forward. And if you don't think that you're ever going to be there, well, maybe we have to have a conversation, because I think that that's absolutely necessary, because we just want to protect what's possible and what's out there and what you've built so far. So schedule a time, read our blog, download the checklist, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.